All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the February 9th, 2021 instance of the SIG Windows Kubernetes community meeting. As always, these meetings are recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so be sure to adhere to the CNCF Code of Conduct and standards. All right, let's kind of just get into it. I don't see any announcements today. Other than today is February 9th, today is the KEP enhancement freeze for the V121 release. I think we're tracking a couple different KEPs that are close to merging, but haven't been kind of fully approved yet. So we can discuss those a little bit more in depth next. All right, first, Arvind, are you here? Yes, let's briefly talk about this the node service log viewer KEP. Last I checked, which was yesterday, we were still waiting for SIG auth approval, but SIG CLI and SIG node had given their LGTMs. Is that still the case?
That is still the case.
Okay, and we have the PRR approver too.
Yep. So I did tag Jordan on this, saying I addressed his comments. We needed an act from him, and I'm assuming Jordan is part of SIG auth, or was he?
Jordan's kind of any and everywhere, but yes,
right.
he can give approval for SIG auth. I was speaking with him with the privileged containers KEP yesterday, and he said he would approve for SIG auth for that. So I think we'll ask him for this as well. And I mentioned in the release Slack channel that we had SIG Windows had 2 KEPs that we're tracking, and we're going to file extensions for both of them if they didn't merge today. It seems like it's a little bit of a rough release in general. I know yesterday the release leads were saying that out of the 62 KEPs that SIGs had put forward as wanting to make progress on in this release, that only 22 of them had met all the deadlines as of yesterday. So there's probably going to be a fair amount of extensions being requested. So I wouldn't worry too much about this, but yeah, we'll start kind of stepping up the nagging, or I will for this one.
Okay, so Mark, just so that I'm clear, you don't need anything from me at this point, right?
Correct. I think the only things that we would need is if there were any kind of feedback in the KEP. I'll take care of filing the extension.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on this. The minute someone posts a review, I will update the KEP.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah, I took a look, and I think that the biggest question was how do we want to handle this bit about how to disable this for cluster admins that don't want this on, and I think we have a pretty decent answer for that.
Yeah,
we don't have to plumb through ourselves. So I hope that it's just that we need somebody to come and verify and then give the approval.
Yeah, sounds good.
Kind of in the same boat with the privileged container KEP. So far, I have approval from Deep looked for SIG storage. Yesterday, Jordan Liggett did quite an in-depth review here, and I was chatting with him on Slack for a while. And I think we're pretty much in alignment with that. I addressed all of his feedback. I'm still waiting for him to come back and give an LGTM. For that, he had wanted SIG storage to take a look also to make sure that we're kind of just not making these things have a drastically different usability story versus the normal containers. And I think where we settled is a pretty decent story. So container mounts are going to look a little bit strange for these containers because there's no file system isolation. Just a quick update, but what we're planning on doing is adding an environment variable to the job object, so it'll be inherited by, I believe it should be inherited by all of the processes that get spawned. That will point to the absolute path on disk where the container volume that is created for these containers is mounted. And then from there, they'll be able to, any program in the container will be able to access any volume mounts that get added in via a relative path rooted off of that environment variable. So we'll go ahead and also update a couple of the Kubernetes client libraries that do things like search for the cluster config in tree for Windows only to look for that environment variable and prefix the paths with that. So I think that ended up being a pretty good I think that ends up being a pretty good user experience. There's one comment left from Deep about named pipe and domain sockets that I think we just need to do a little bit of investigation to make sure that we can create symlinks or junctions to those. And if that works, then we'll follow the same path there.
Sounds
Yep. And then yeah, I'm waiting for Jordan to give a SIG auth LGTM. I don't know if Deep is your LGTM kind of, would that be just accepted for SIG storage, or do we need somebody else too?
If that comes up, you can say, yeah, I took a look at it from the Windows CSI perspective. So
okay, sounds good. And then there's, does anybody have any questions on either of those keps?
I guess my comment might
Sure.
work in this thing. So the question I've got is, I've been trying to get this working, and I've came to the sort of conclusion that it wasn't skipping a CNI, even though it's going on the host network. So I kind of was talking that through with yourself, Mark, and Danny, and I've kind of got it to a point that I think that it now is skipping the CNI in containerd, but then the issue I'm getting is then if I build another release for containerd, then it breaks the privileged bit. So then I get on the host network, but with no privileged escalation. So I'm trying to work out what am I missing, because I've just built off master on containerd. I'm now skipping the CNI, which is good, but now I'm at a loss as to what I can't escalate. So I lose like the host mount and stuff like that.
Interesting. Yeah, for that, I think we really need Danny Cantor to chime in. I'm looking at the participant list and I don't see him there. He's the one who built the containerd bits that I've been using. And he has much more deep experience in containerd versus myself. I will make an action item, take an action item to ping him for that. And
I guess the thing that I'm just trying to understand is, as everything's going on the host network, should we be, is part of the KEP, should we be skipping CNI invocations?
Yeah, as I'm trying to pull up the section, this KEP has gotten quite large, but part of the work here, which wasn't called out in detail, but was highlighted, was a bunch of changes that were planned for containerd itself. I think some of them were here. Yeah, so we called out enabling host network mode for privileged containers. And also all of the changes in containerd needed to plumb making sure the CNI, like CNI was called correctly. There is, I'll just spend a minute on this and we could break out about this after, but there's also, in some of the comments in here, I walked through how the kubelet translates the host network equals true flag and the pod spec to the fields that live on the CRI calls and go through, and we'll want to just make sure that that whole end-to-end story works with containerd for definitely for the next major release of containerd that comes out, which I think is going to be 1.5.
Cool.
Does that help answer the questions?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. This, unfortunately, like this KEP spans so many different projects. It's hard to figure out which ones to go kind of in-depth detail into and which ones are just adding noise. So I think we chose to not kind of go deep into the containerd like changes that we think we're going to need. But
What
that
is
is all.
the release cadence of containerd? Like, so say Perry was to get this working, like say by the end of next week or the week after that, and then we had an upstream containerd patch after talking to you and Danny. what, like, what's the dance that we have to do in terms, I guess I don't even care what the dance is. I just want to know what's the timeline for the dance to be over for us to be able to get this into a release.
Yeah, I think that their release cadence is pretty much whenever there's sufficient new like feature churn to warrant a new minor release. There's a new minor release. We can well, we'd have to kind of ask them to, like, I think say, hey, this is ready. Can we cut a new release? And
Do you all have any containerd people? I don't even know if we do.
we do in Microsoft. There's a couple. So Brian Goff he's a big Moby contributor who works on Containerd, mainly on the Linux side, but I think he would be able to help talk to the right folks. Kevin Parsons and Danny Cantor are getting more and more involved in that.
Okay.
Yeah, Kevin is one of the maintainers now, so we definitely can ask for it. And as Mark, you said, it's basically based on if you go to the community members. There is Mark Brown, there is forgetting
Mike
his name.
Brown.
Yeah, Mike Brown, and then there is the Derek, right? Derek, Mike Brown, and then these are a couple of folks. If you reach out to them and there's a legitimate case, they do they'll listen to you and they'll have the next release. But I think there's Mark, isn't there also a nightly build they have?
They have a nightly build. Yeah, they have nightly builds, and I also have. I set this up for a while ago. Let me pull this up in a different window, and then we can take a look at it. I have in one of my GitHub repositories let me just look up this. Yeah, I have a GitHub action that builds Containerd from the Containerd branch, HCS shim from tip of tree, and ctr.exe from tip of tree. And we have been using this in some of the CI jobs for SIG Windows. So this is kind of a stopgap if we want to get automated testing around all of this, or have kind of an unofficial, like a nightly build cadence. As soon as we do think that we have changes up that are gonna bring big functionality improvements for Windows, we should reach out to them and say, hey, like, what are the timelines for a new release? And here's what we'd like to have included in that, and try and just make sure we're on their radar too. That is a great thing to call out.
Not to like nosedive, but just really quick, why are you building HCS shim? Isn't that compiled into Containerd anyways?
It is, but one of the reasons why we did this was because there's the ingestion or vending process can take time, and early on there were issues where there were regressions in HCS shim that weren't.
You just want to make sure it compiles before you go. Okay.
Well, it compiles and is functional.
All right. Okay. I got you. Yeah. All right.
That's kind of the main reason. All right, we could talk more about that after. One other enhancement that I wanted to call out, I just actually got notified of this yesterday. And looking at the comments, I think that the plan is to try and put together the KEP in 121 and start implementation on this in 122. But so there's a KEP from Peter Hunt at Red Hat that basically tries to make as it says, a C advisor less stats endpoint that's entirely based on the CRI stats. And the reason why I got pulled in was there's a lot of good questions about what does this make sense for Windows? And if not, like, what fields do we need for Windows, and what objects in here? I have just started to take a look at this. But I wanted to call this out. If anybody else is interested or has time to take a look, that would be helpful. I'm definitely going to reach out to those same folks, Danny and Kevin, to take a look at this as well. Here, I'm really thankful that Derek and Elena from SIG Node kind of reached out and said, hey, we don't think a lot of these jive with Windows before, like, as part of their initial review. So I think that's awesome that folks are looking out for Windows now more and more. All right, yeah, the link to that's on the agenda. If anybody wants to take a look, I'll reformat that link. Quickly, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Windows Defender discussions we had last week. So there were a couple issues that were coming up. We got a hold of some of the Windows Defenders folks, and I think that the one kind of concrete piece of feedback or guidance we have today is that the Defender team kind of said that whenever anybody's running container D, they should also run that PowerShell commandlet to add the container D process as a Windows Defender exclusion with the PowerShell. I'll actually put the whole PowerShell command in the notes in a second. I believe it's like update MP exclusion list. And they said they must point to the full path of the container D binary. They said that should be sufficient to block most of the to disallow, like, to stop most of the scanning. If anybody doesn't see that, that would be I'd like to be able to kind of raise that to folks too. I took a quick look, and none of the kind of official install steps for Container D mention that. They usually just register it as a service and set up some environment for that, but they don't run that PowerShell thing. I think that it would be good to kind of hopefully patch the Container D install process eventually to, like, if you do register it as a service, call that out. So I think we'll get an issue filed to see what folks think of that. But at a minimum, update some docs and say, please exclude this path from the Defender scanning. Now, I know that there were some other kind of concerns about CPU overhead, even with Defender not installed. And those we still don't really have answers for, but we will kind of continue investigating. Muzz, does that kind of sum up everything that we talked about? Sorry, Ibrahim, did you have something?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So setting the exclusion through PowerShell, does it require a restart for the whole VM?
I don't believe so.
No,
No,
if you do set MP preference and then do any of the MP preferences, it just takes effect straight away. So I've done disable real-time scanning, and then as soon as I've disabled it, immediately the thing goes away. I was wondering whether we could get some of the exclusions either added into the docs or into the SIG Windows tools, so at least someone could just like replicate the exclusions. And also, I guess it's useful for people who've got third-party antivirus to be able to then to copy the exclusions and try and get them working with theirs.
Yeah, we'll do that soonish, and everybody can verify that works. And I'll go and update this with the exact commands, and then we'll update some of the SIG Windows tools docs and everything with that.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, and then Muzz, does that did you get any other updates that I hadn't seen, or is that kind of all the guidance we've gotten so far?
No, that's all the guidance. I think there are a lot of, like, we're seeing different kind of issues and we're trying to treat them differently. So with Defender, I think you covered it. There are some from like Jeremy, I think forwarded from Container D perspective. I am asking our Container D engineers also to take a look if there is like something coming from Container D itself, not Defender. But as far as the Defender is concerned, you're right.
Okay, I'll also post I'll create a new thread in the SIG Windows Slack saying, hey, here's the guidance, here's how to disable it. We'll get the docs updated, but you can try this out now. All right, I had a quick question. I know James kind of presented last week the proposed restructuring of the SIG Windows board to add a new group called Signal. I think that this is pretty much ready to merge. I just wanted to do one last kind of temperature check to see if anybody had any concerns. If not, I think we'll get this merged.
So Mark, right before in the previous meeting about testing folks were talking about adding another column for sort of CI.
Okay. Is that different than this signal? I think that we could probably rename this to CI. It's my understanding was the intention was to be treated as a CI signal, and they just opted for signal instead of CI.
Yeah.
This is for the project board.
Oh, okay.
Not for the test grid.
Okay, so this, yes. Let's go ahead and do that too. Where is it? This project board
I
here?
mean, that's what you thought too, right? Or was it something
Yeah.
else?
What was this signal for, Mark? I
The
thought you were gonna
signal
add a-
will be a new group under testgrid.kates.io.
Yeah.
So there'll be
Oh.
right now.
Oh, I see.
These are kind of the major buckets we have for SIG Windows. There'll be another one that shows up here that will just be SIG Windows signal, and that will include a subset of the test passes that are running here, the ones that we're actually actively, trying to keep 100% green.
Yeah, that way, Arvind, the reason for this is that I went to grad school with this guy from the military, and he always used to tell us that if you have red tests, then nobody ever fix any of the tests because the broken window theory. So this way we have something to look at, and we can have a binary yes or no, and then we can be really careful about the thing that we call signal, right? Without having to delete other jobs that aren't signal, right? That was the idea.
Yeah, that's sure. That's fine. I think what we were saying is, we should add a column if needed to the SIG Windows board.
Yes, we can organize it.
Yep. I can do that.
Mostly that's just for the overall, every time all of us join that 15 minutes early, we're all context switching over and trying to figure out what we should be doing. And I don't think any of us really remembers what we did last week. So that way, if we have that column, we can just have that column be the source of truth for our progress in this overall initiative, I guess.
Yeah, we just need to be cognizant that having that column is not sufficient. We need to remember to move things into that column because it doesn't happen automatically.
Yeah. And
Yep.
we need to do the things in that column also. Hopefully move things out of that column. Yeah. Okay.
All right, I'll create it right now. I'll move it over after. Sometimes that slows down my browser quite a bit. That's a big board. All right, so it doesn't sound like anybody has any concerns about that kind of curated test bucket. So I'll go ahead and get that merged soon, and then can start using that to help identify issues that we need to put in that new column on the project board.
Yeah.
All right, Perry, did we cover your
Yeah, we
agenda
covered
items?
it at the same time as the cap.
Okay, sounds good. And then Ravi, I think I see you added
Yeah.
a new pull request on here.
Yeah. So the main question is related to the PR that I opened. So as far as I understood, container D with CSA has never been tested properly. Just to give everyone some background, what we wanted to do is we wanted to switch from Docker test to container D test on the Windows host. But I think what we found yesterday when Andy replied back to me was there are a couple of issues posted in Azure CSI, and we never got them to work in first place.
Yeah, so first of all, I'll apologize. I've been quite busy with the whole KEP process. I've been following some of these, but I haven't had time to investigate. We did have CSI proxy working with container D in 120. I made some updates, and we also had the entry storage driver
Right.
container stuff working.
Yeah.
I think that, and I did set up some periodic jobs to test those. That was quite a while ago, though, probably back last October. And yes, since then, some things changed and things are rotting. So they don't work today. But
Yeah, so-
they did work at one point.
Okay.
We should get them. We should figure out what's regressed and get them working today.
Okay. Yeah. So Andy mentioned that there are some issues, and then he has pointed me to some of the issues on Azure File CSI driver repo and Azure Disk CSI driver repo. So if you go to, if you scroll down a bit, I have referenced the issue like make container D test mandatory. And in there, Andy has mentioned, if you scroll down, Andy has mentioned those two issues, like does not work is what he told.
Okay, some of these were, yeah, so I think that there were a couple of issues all over the place. We can talk about this either on Slack or next meeting, because I need to drop in a minute for the SIG node meeting. But
Okay.
I think there were kind of a couple classes of issues. One of the issues was that the container images that these were producing were multi-arch image manifests, and
Mhm.
container D, I don't know if this is necessarily a bug in container D, but container D requires that if it's a multi-arch image manifest and it contains multiple versions of Windows or of Windows containers, that some metadata that was not getting added to the container manifests be set, specifically the OS version.
Mhm.
And that wasn't the case with Docker. I think if that wasn't there with Docker, it would assume to pull the first image that matched OS equals Windows, and if OS version was set, it would pull the correct one. So part of that was we needed to update the build process for these container images.
I think the same thing applied to Docker as well. For example, if you take a look at the image building process for the pause image or the test images, you can see that we manually add the OS version to the images in the manifest list. That's mandatory.
Okay, yeah, and that's what's kind of described in detail for the second issue. It looks like that so I commented here, and this is that specific field that we're missing. And yeah, Claudio actually did a lot of work to figure out how to add these tags to the manifests with when we build these container images with BuildKit, which is awesome. I believe that, so these image poll issues are because of that. And it looks like, where was it? Somebody commented that some of so for whatever reason, specific version tags for these container images have the metadata, but the latest tag doesn't. So I think this is something that Andy or some of the maintainers need to help address.
Perhaps I think it might be possible that the image building process changed for this project as well. Previously, we were using Windows images, Windows nodes to build the Windows images, and the Windows nodes would automatically add the OS version entry into the image itself. But Docker BuildX doesn't know how to do that, and you cannot use Docker tag or Docker manifest image. I forget the command itself, but at this very moment you cannot use the Docker manifest command itself to add the OS version itself. We kind of use a workaround for that. It will eventually make it into the Docker manifest command itself, but not at the moment. Take a look at the pause image.
Yeah, we'll put some more links here. Yeah, and that Claudio has really deep knowledge here, so reach out to him. But to sum this up, I think at least the first set of issues that we're seeing, I'm not saying that this is all of the issues here, is that the builds, the container images being produced from this repo aren't compatible, like aren't formatted correctly. There's a couple of options. One thing that I have done in the past to test this is if you pull the image on like the OS version that you want, and then you retag it and push just a single image, container D can pull a single a container manifest that has a single image, no problem. That's the kind of the best way to verify that this works.
Okay.
Hey, Ravi,
Yeah,
working a few times or something?
Sorry?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Sorry, Ravi, were you saying it worked a couple of times? And
yeah, like if you look at the tests, they're not failing continuously. Like if it's an image pull issue, it would have failed continuously, but it wasn't. like it's sort of flaking those tests, like especially 7 of them or 9 of them, they're flaking. But they've been flaking pretty consistently. But there were times when it has passed. If you look at the entire time frame, there were instances where those particular tests have passed as well. And I could see that.
Would
the
it be
PSI
possible
disk-
because the test ran on the master node and then of course it passed because it has the Linux manifest images into it?
I
Or
do
have
need
it-
to drop. I'm going to just make Jay the host so that we could continue discussions here. Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, make sure to also taint the master or coordinate or something like that, because otherwise you might end up with pods or containers spawning up on the master node, which isn't the point of that particular test run, right? So that might be the reason why it passes sometimes.
Right. The way that particular test works is it runs on the Windows host always. Like we ensure that the pod actually lands onto the Windows node.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So the other thing is, I think yesterday I attended the CSI call and I discussed with Deep. Perhaps what I can do is I'll set up a meeting with all the interested folks, and then I can show like once the daemon set on the Windows node comes up, like it is flaking to mount the volume or create the volume even on the Windows source. So I'll set up an environment and then try to reproduce this issue, and then I'll call this meeting.
Yeah, please do. I'm interested.
Yeah, please CC me on that too, Ravi.
Yeah. Yeah. So Deep, when we had the discussion yesterday, Deep was saying that he wasn't sure if this was tested properly, like the Unix domains, if they work properly with CS with the container D is something that was not tested. Correct me if I'm wrong, Deep.
Yeah, I recall when this was exactly going back to what Mark was mentioning, that he initially, ran some tests. And I think that's when he was running into some domain socket mount issues with container D in Windows. And I was wondering, that was my first kind of gut feel, like if it's that same issue. But then I know Ravi mentioned that it does work out sometimes. So it's not like, a consistent failure. That made me think that, it might be that the Azure file CSI driver is probably crashing or having some kind of issue. As a result of which, when that mount call comes up, as Ravi just showed in the log, it's saying no one's listening on the other side of the domain socket. So yeah, I think the next logical step here would be to see if there are any issues with the Azure file CSI plugin itself. Maybe from its logs, or I know from some of the other logs, if that would have a note of whether that the containers for that are running properly or not.
Yeah, the kubelet log on that Windows host, we can actually look at that and then say if the daemon set, the CSI driver daemon set has been deployed correctly or not.
Right.
So that should give you an indication, Claudia.
Yeah, so that's the deployment. And then, I mean, once it's deployed, whether the containers are actually up or not. As in, the daemon set would come and say, okay, deployment succeeded, but the actual pods for the daemon set may not actually come up, right? Or as they're coming up, they might have an issue and decide to stop. So I think that's the part I think we really need to drill down into.
But are you saying that, Ravi, that you would see that in the kubelet on mount? Why would you see that in the kubelet?
Like every pod that is coming on that node, the kubelet would have an entry saying if it has succeeded.
Oh, you're saying just use the kubelet to see if the pods are okay.
Yeah.
You're not talking about looking at the mount operations. Okay.
Yeah, like even when the volume gets created on the kubelet, you would get a notification saying that this pod is trying to mount this volume, or this volume is actually getting created on the node. So that information would be present in kubelet log.
As far as this is concerned overall, we're just not sure whether this stuff all works properly right now. It's either a flake or it's a bug, I guess. So what are we gonna do next, Rob? Are you gonna schedule something for us all to talk about?
Yeah, so what I can, what I can do is, I'll set up a debugging session, and before that, I'll point everyone to the logs that we have, where we can see that a particular daemon set, the CSA daemon set, is like running or not. And in the same log, we can say that there is this particular pod, which is actually a test pod that gets spun up on that Windows node, and the test pod is supposed to either create a volume or mount the existing volume. So, and during those operations, I can clearly see in the kubelet log that it's not able to communicate with the socket, the CSA socket. So I just want everyone to look at that, and then perhaps I can set up the debugging meeting when I'm able to reproduce it.
Why don't you send the meeting notice to the SIG Windows Google group? I think that way everybody who's on SIG Windows will get it and can choose to attend it or not, and you can attach the logs to that same meeting notice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I was also wondering, so do you happen to have that Azure subscription where you can bring up the same testbed with, like, containerd deployed on the Windows nodes, and just deploy the Azure file CSI driver, and then just we try to just spin up a node that tries to mount a volume from Azure file?
Yeah, so the way I have done it in the past is I've used like my own test cluster, like Azure cluster. I do not have like the same subscription group that we use for CI. I do not have it, and I have installed containerd and all those things manually on the host using the install script that we have.
Got it. Okay.
In the tools.
But we do think this is Azure specific. We don't think this is you're stealing this from SMB and other CSI providers.
I was checking with Google folks yesterday, and then I think Jing, she has confirmed that they don't use CSI driver on GC. Right, Deep? That's what she mentioned.
Yeah, I think her point was they're not testing with containerd yet on GC, I think.
Oh, containerd, not the CSI.
CSI plugin with the Docker runtime.
Yeah, to be clear, this works perfectly on Docker. Like we have another test which actually is a replica of the same test. There we just use Docker instead of containerd. That's the only difference.
And we use CSI proxy.
And we use CSI proxy there too, yeah.
Anyway, it's another containerd weird thing. It's everywhere. Okay.
Do we happen to know what Andy is running as part of the Azure file CI? Does that exclusively run Docker, or?
So I looked at the test suite that they are having on the Azure Disk CSA. They have both. Like if you look at the PRs, like you can see that they have two different tests, one on Docker and the other on containerd.
I see. And there everything is running fine?
Yeah, like E2E Windows, it works fine.
I see.
Yeah, but I have to validate this particular part where if they're using Docker, are they going with Intri or are they going with CSI, something that I have to check, at least for the test that they have. But they have one with Docker, the other with containerd. Let me quickly find that out.
I'm going to keep this open, and I have to context switch over to some enhancements related stuff, anything from the release managers, but I'll be here.
Okay.
I'm going to drop, guys. I'll catch you later.
Yep. Yeah, if you look at this particular job, so Deep, if you look at that particular job,
Yeah.
It-
Okay.
yeah, it says that they're testing CSI driver, but they don't have anything specific to entry. Like they have another job, the next job, which says pull entry as your disk ETL. So I think we are actually testing disk CSI driver with Docker there.
Yep. That seems likely. Most probably.
Yeah, and then we have, like, if you add the last job, I think if you add dash container D, that's the container D job.
Yep.
Yeah, 602, that's the line number.
Yeah, and so is that one passing, or that's the one that you said is failing?
The container D one is failing,
Okay.
but if you look at the jobs, sorry, the existing PRs in, let me open the,
Hey, Ravi, I got a drop as well. Maybe we can just sync on this on Slack and.
sure, yeah, that works. This is the job.
The thread and Slack. I'll jump in there too.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. See ya.